Dr. Davis, if we can start with your introduction.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ashleigh Davis-Bergsohn, but I go by Dr. Davis because it's kind of long. I'm kind of a mouthful for people to pronounce. I originally was born and raised in Ferguson, Missouri, and my background is my father is Black and my mother is white, so I'm biracial. I'm the only child, and I decided I always wanted to be a veterinarian, kind of like lots of people did. And so I went to veterinary school at University of Wisconsin and graduated in 2013. My main focus was large animal or equine. And so I then pursued an equine internship following my schooling, and I went down to Florida, where I spent a year there in kind of the West Palm Beach area doing equine medicine and surgery internship. And after that, I decided I wanted to be an ambulatory veterinarian. So I moved up to New Jersey with my husband and our 3 cats. And I started practicing there. And I'm currently the supervising veterinarian at Monticello Raceway in New York State, working for New York State Gaming Commission. I additionally have my own practice called Integrated Veterinary Services, which I started in 2019 after I got certified in acupuncture at the Chi Institute down in Florida. So I'm certified in both canine and equine, and I do that on the side and then I have my my full-time job with the state. I am a mom of 2 little kids. I have a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. I've got tons of animals at home, but this is really important to me to be here today to speak to you guys about BIPOC mental health, because there are a lot of issues that I think we deal with that maybe go under recognized. And so being able to share our experiences with you and just give you a better window into what being BIPOC in veterinary medicine is like and how we can help support the mental health of our veterinary professionals and veterinary students. So thank you very much for having me today, and I'm very excited to be here to talk to you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Now, Dr. Lin-Hendel, if you don't mind giving your introduction, please.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Erika Lin-Hendel, they, them, theirs pronouns. I am a small animal relief veterinarian out of Arizona. I am a first-generation American. My mom is from Taiwan and my dad is from Germany. So biracial, but with European upbringing, which is like slightly nuanced and slightly different compared to like the American experience. I always knew that I wanted to work with animals and originally started out but went towards developmental biology in a PhD program at University of Pennsylvania. When I learned I could have the opportunity to transfer into their combined degree program. So I graduated from University of Pennsylvania's veterinary medical scientist training program in 2016 and went to Iowa to practice swine medicine in like a consulting role. Ended up deciding to leave both swine medicine and Iowa in 2020 and engage in small animal practice, specifically to create more space for advocacy and social justice work in a way that was restorative to me. So Dr. Davis-Bergsohn and I both serve on the board of MCVMA and in like coordinating programming in that role. And then I'm also a board member for Not One More Vet. So mental health is very, very important to me. And I second Ashleigh's comment about how some of that intersectionality that BIPOC veterinarians face really have another layer to the conversation. And so we're really excited that Covetrus and NOMV came together to partner with MCVMA to have this discussion. And so thank you all for being here.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. My name is Carla Fernandez, and I am a registered veterinary technician out here in San Francisco, California. I was born and raised out here, and my undergrad education has been in science. And before deciding to go to veterinary medicine, I actually wanted to go to pre-med, but the human bond between people and animals is what really just drove me to make the decision to be a veterinary technician who actually specializes in oncology. I am very much I was born here, but my parents are actually both from Central America. So I don't talk very much about that culture, but it's actually something that I'm becoming comfortable talking about, and having this opportunity here with Dr. Erika and Dr. Ashleigh, this is amazing. And I'm really glad, like Dr. Erika said, as far as Covetrus and NOMV, as a board member, as a technician for NOMV, I'm very proud to be here to actually give this conversation some exposure and awareness in our communities, especially in the veterinary profession. So let's start off this amazing conversation with some questions for both of our panelists here. My first question is, why is it important to have BIPOC Mental Health Month?
So I'm going to get started here and go with what I actually think is a very great practice in figuring out like where something comes from or how something starts. So BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month was formally recognized in 2008. And it was formally recognized by the House of Representatives in honor of, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but Baby Moore Campbell, who was a social justice and mental health equity advocate, journalist and author and changemaker who passed 2 years prior to the passing of the claiming of July as BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month. And she passed in 2006. And fundamentally, a lot of her work was focused on really bringing attention that BIPOC individuals, like especially Black and Indigenous community, are less likely to get appropriate care and treatment in mental health spaces, while also recognizing the incredible impact of mental health illness, like on the US in general, right? So not only is it incredibly important for us as a society in general, but that we also have a cohort of people who aren't, who don't have the same access or like expertise in the people who are providing treatment. So there are also nuances that BIPOC individuals face at higher rates than non-BIPOC individuals that create barriers to mental wellness. So like repeated trauma, discrimination, intergenerational trauma, and increased discrimination along with intersectional identity. So things like neurodiversity, disability, pregnancy, like any number of additional things that that marginalized identity individuals already face. When we layer race and ethnicity over that, it can not just be compounding, but also like a multiplication factor. And I already alluded to this a little bit, but like there aren't a whole lot of BIPOC mental health providers. So when we think about the relationship between a person and a therapist or a mental health expert, that is supposed to be a relationship that's centered on safety and trust. And when there are things like racism or microaggressions or poorly informed individuals that are trying to provide care, that can really result in both an undermining of trust and safety and additional harm and also like reticence for people to access that care in the first place. So according to the APA, only 2% of psychiatrists are Black, 4% of psychologists are Black, 5% Asian, 5% Hispanic, and 1% multiracial. So there's a really big discrepancy and very difficult time for people getting care that reflects or is knowledgeable in the needs that they have. So that's like a lot of information, but for foundation as perspective, that's why we're here, and that's why this specific month recognizing that is so important.
Thank you. Dr. Davis?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that we're probably going to keep bringing up is the fact that there is a undercurrent, a layer of constant stress that happens within the BIPOC community because of just being BIPOC. Just because you're the only one in the room who looks like you most of the time. Oftentimes you're asked for your opinion as a representative of your race. And so you feel that pressure. In addition to the pressures you're already feeling in the veterinary profession, all of us are pretty type A people who are very perfectionistic and want to do the best that we can all the time and push ourselves really hard. And I think that sometimes leads to detrimental effects because self-care hasn't until recently been emphasized as much. Just kind of pushed through. Everybody else did it. Why can't you? And so I think those issues become compounded when you also have to then deal with microaggressions or people making fun of your accent in class, or people asking you, how does your hair look like that? Things that maybe don't seem obviously traumatic, but because of the history of our lives, having had those things asked of us constantly and having those, that's something that I think is really important to try and address to make sure that we understand the complexity of the issue.
Thank you. So what's important for participants here to understand about the experience of BIPOC individuals in our profession, in the veterinary profession or veterinary medicine?
So I think there's really, it's been difficult, I think, to try and get people to understand the necessity for increasing diversity. I mean, I think people understand in general it's a good idea in principle, but I think a lot of times the response I've heard back is, oh, well, how do we get more BIPOC people interested in veterinary medicine? They're not interested in it. They don't, they're not applying. And I think what's important to understand is not that they're not interested in it, but that they don't have access to it. So there are a lot of barriers that get put up that have nothing to, like, say for veterinary medicine, you have to do a lot of experiential hours, right? So you have to go and volunteer and get 100 or 200 or 300 hours of volunteering time at a veterinary clinic and have that person write you a letter saying they did it. Well, that's great, but what if you have to work while you're in school? What if you don't have a car and can't get to these clinics? What if they don't accept, they're already only taking one student or something, right? And you don't have the ability to be able to go. I think those things are important to realize that there's a barriers to access, not necessarily barriers to interest. It's not a lack of interest. And another thing to know, and I think it's kind of true of lots of professions, like medical professions, not just veterinary medicine, but dentistry and obviously psychiatry as well, is that it's very, very dominated by white people and by males, especially in the top tiers. I think now, at least in veterinary medicine, there's been a lot more females but that's not always the case, and especially not at the higher levels. It tends to be lots of predominantly white males. And so when you're a student coming into school and you're looking around, you know, excited to start and looking for people to kind of look up to, for mentors, for people that you can't really ever see yourself. There's no one. I never had I literally can't think of one time that I had a professor who looked like me in my 4 years of veterinary school. And I've worked with, until joining the MCVMA, I honestly had not met as many BIPOC veterinarians. There's just so few of us out there. So knowing that you're like one of very few, you just kind of put your head down and trudge through and try not to really cause too much fuss, because you know you're the only one that's really being affected by it. Like, people don't think they're being affected by it. Oh, you know, it's not a big deal. People are getting in. You know, you're here with us. It's the same. It's not a big deal. But when you really look at all the background of it, there's a lot of stress and additional trauma that we face by trying to be that one and only person in our classes.
Yeah.
Actually,
Oh, go ahead, Carla. Sorry.
I agree with Dr. Ashleigh. It's a very good point. As a technician, now in my older years, if you will, being a mentor for technicians who are afraid to come into this profession because they are BIPOC or aren't represented, and they're scared because they feel that, well, you know what, this majority is the only one who gets the opportunity to go to that tech school. I don't have the money. I don't have this. They're not going to accept me. And once they actually have someone or people mentoring, it does change. It's just hard to get there, you know.
I echo like both of you as far as the mentorship component, and I think that also, you know, in that space, if you're figuring out how to connect to community and like uplift and amplify voices and create space for decision making at the table and asking for feedback, I think that one of the most important things to consider, like given leadership structures, is to recognize that some of these leadership structures, hierarchy, and the way that people have the dialogue is like can be very traumatic for BIPOC people to navigate, because it can also be very isolating. So when you are in a space where you are not part of the dominant culture, retaliation is real, right? When you give critical feedback, when you talk about how there are problems that might be apparent, very often unconscious bias or microaggressions, or like people having a hard time receiving that feedback, can have really significant consequences on individuals that are coming from marginalized identity, who are trying to either self-advocate or gain like just trying to get comfortable in the roles and the positions that they're in. And I think that that's something that I hope for veterinary medicine, especially as we have more conversations about how to create a culture of care within our organizations, is really important, because none of us are an island, right? We don't exist as soon as we walk through the door of a clinic. It's not just about the medicine, it's about people, right? And if I am experiencing things that are not just in the clinic, if I'm experiencing things where as I move out throughout the world, it's the same thing with intersectionality of queer and trans identity, along with BIPOC individuals. We are not existing only in our workspaces. And I think that's something that I would like to really emphasize about veterinary medicine mental health topics, because it's not just about the struggles that we face when we're practicing medicine. It's about more than that. And that's also something that would behoove us in how we talk about mental health in general.
Thank you. Are there nuances around mental health arising from being a part of the veterinary profession and BIPOC identity?
So I think that in a lot of conversations around mental health and veterinary medicine in general, I know, at least anecdotally, that like mental health professionals can lack an understanding about the veterinary profession and our professional lives in general. So saying that, like, on top of that, you know, I hear stories about people being like, my therapist is asking about their pet, like, or, you know, there are things like, you know, there are things that we push ourselves to do as veterinarians that like are not, that do not contribute well to mental health or health in general. Like when we think about how we interact with food when we're on the clinic floor, or lack of it, or and like hydration, like those things like that we shouldn't do, that we have to kind of fight ourselves to make sure that we're taking care of our basic physiologic needs. Like a lot of mental health professionals look at that and being like, what are you doing? Right. And it can be hard to have that conversation, just to say, like, sometimes I know that I am putting myself in situations that are going to be difficult or harmful, and I don't necessarily have the option every day, right, on whether or not I'm going to do that. So I think that there are a lot of veterinary professionals that can struggle with the relationship with mental health professionals and being called out. You know, we need the cultural shift anyway, but that can still be difficult. And so then add on top of that, right, the potential of experiencing like racial harm in your relationship with your therapist. So that's something that I've experienced before. That's something that I know other BIPOC individuals in my life have experienced before. And it can be really difficult to engage in relationships with mental health professionals if you don't feel like you're going to be safe.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I kind of had pushed it to the back of my mind, but I was like, oh, you're right. I had that experience also with a therapist of mine. Because to me, you know, talking about what's happening in the world and how it's affecting me and is important. And when I started to talk about how I was doing a lot more research, I joined the MCVMA, and I'm doing a lot more like self-discovery and trying to understand, doing a lot more reading. And it was becoming difficult with some relationships that I had, talking to certain people about it. They didn't want to hear about it. And her advice was kind of like, well, you know, if it's a tough topic, then you just don't have to talk to them about it. I'm like, okay, this is kind of like very integral to who I am as a person and my development and like what I'm going through now in my life. And if you can't hear this as a, you know, if my therapist is even like, yeah, just maybe just table that conversation, you know, it's not that big of a deal. And honestly, she was even a BIPOC person. She was Puerto Rican, born in Puerto Rico, and then moved here later and had to go through a lot of struggles to be able to become a therapist. And so I was like, oh, she'll understand. And even so it's not like every BIPOC therapist is also going to really understand your issues, right? Like I'm sure the things that I go through and have been gone through are very different than what Erika has gone through, or even Karla, you know, based on just our histories and our families and where we grew up and all of that. And so, but one thing that I did want to give a little note of hope was that there is an international association of veterinary social workers. So it's an association that's relatively new, but they actually are training therapists and social workers in what veterinary professionals need. And so it's more about like Karla was talking about, the human animal bond and the trauma that all veterinarians, not just BIPOC veterinarians, but the trauma that all of us go through, losing patients, not being able to help, you know, feeling like clients are mad because we didn't do enough, all of that kind of self guilt and stuff that we go through. I think it's good that they at least have recognized, like Erika said, that there's a lot of very specific issues to veterinary medicine that were not being understood and we weren't being helped. And so I'm hoping that that association will be able to churn out some therapists that then maybe can go to the vet schools and be counselors, specific counselors for the veterinary schools. I think right now a lot of the schools have like a counseling program within the university that the students are able to access, which is great. It's better than nothing. But a lot of those therapists just don't understand the intricacies of the issues that we have to deal with. And so having someone with a better understanding would be very helpful. But yeah, I think there's a lot of little that lack of understanding hopefully can be changed by us just sharing our stories and hopefully making it more obvious what things. I mean, I think NOMV has done a great job at showing everybody that that suicide is very high in our profession, and then that's a problem, and we have to work on it. And how do we work on it, and what are we doing about it? Is kind of is a little bit harder, but I think we need to try and make sure that we have as many counselors or therapists that are available and willing to learn. I think a lot of the university ones sometimes just don't have even an understanding of that there may be a difference of the issues that we are dealing with.
Very good points, very true, which alludes to this really good question about what work do you believe that needs to be done to change the landscape of mental health for BIPOC individuals in veterinary medicine?
So this is like obviously going to be a multifaceted process over a long timeline, and I don't think that there's like a single solution, but some of the things that need to happen, like investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion that's led by diverse cohorts and teams that are informed about multiple facets of marginalized identity. So you can't, like, I very much appreciate that a lot of organizations are like either hiring somebody or like creating positions or focus groups, like DEI committees that are full of people who want to learn are great, but they are not qualified to make recommendations. This is my opinion. I would say this is my opinion, not necessarily the opinion of the organizations I am affiliated with. So, and that, I have seen a lot of effort. There are a lot of really amazing content that has been developed through volunteerism and some paid work, which is a great start. But I do think a lot of the time it tends to be kind of checklist oriented, and sometimes it doesn't actually get into the very uncomfortable topics. And some of those things about like paying and investing back into individuals that experience discrimination and recognizing like that it's not like we're going to have a monthly workshop and like that's not, I appreciate that. It doesn't make my life easier as like a person, like like autistic queer person of color. Sometimes it does have like, with AVMA convention coming up, there's a lot of like excitement around a lot of different projects, and MCVMA board members are going to be speaking both, but our board members like are still like volunteer people who are taking time to create this content, to go out and speak. They are getting like compensated for their speaking time, but that doesn't necessarily cover the emotional labor that is involved to still teach others. So like usually one of the big things I say is invest more into it, contribute to the long-term investment of people sharing their expertise, and keep on doing it. It doesn't stop, right? And that is often the thing that a lot of organizations that I have worked with, that I have talked to, that I've given recommendations to, don't necessarily want to hear. But I'm going to say it here, I'm going to say it for whatever platform I ended up on. That's what I'm going to point out. That's, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with all that. Very true. Dr. Davis.
Yeah, so I think another also very large change that would help would be veterinary schools investing in hiring professors and staff and teachers that look like us. They're out there, and you can't just hire them. You also have to then create an environment where they feel comfortable and included, and they're going to want to stay, right? You can't just hire someone and say, okay, we hired our one Latina or our one Black professor, we're good, we got it. Kind of like the checklist thing Erika was mentioning. Because like I said, it's very, like, there's research that's been done that shows that students do better when they're taught by someone who looks like them. They tend to, I think it's because they can see themselves in that person, and they feel more successful. They feel like there's an opportunity for them there that maybe wasn't there before. But I think that would have been helpful just in alleviating some of the some of the stress just from being the only one a lot of the times. But that's also a big undertaking. But I think another thing that's important is making, like Erika was saying, making sure that the people that you have that are making decisions about diversity, equity, and inclusion are people who have done some kind of training in it. And I think a lot of times they have, like, even the classes that are now being required by some of the veterinary schools are being taught. Some of them are being taught by professors, which is fine. But a lot of the professors are doing so many other things that this is not their specialty. It's not their area of expertise. And so having people investing in experts in the field and not just somebody is important, because I think also it feels like I feel it. I can feel when someone doesn't really know what they're talking about, and they're just there to like say, yeah, that's really important, and kind of blowing wind up, like I just feel like you're like, yeah, okay, but if you can actually have those deeper talks and get to the deeper issues and feel like there's some kind, not just regurgitate this is our policy because we support all people of every color and every disability and okay, that's great, but what are you actually doing? What is a policy? How do we address these issues, right? Like, what is actually being done? And if there's a problem, how are you going to know? How are you going to know? How are you going to change it? Is there a way, is there a way for us to report issues? All of that stuff, really delving into the policy and the process by which the DEI initiatives are being implemented. Is it just like a 4-hour course that they found online and we're like, hey, everybody do this, you're good? Or is it something that's really they're gonna be bringing it up semester to semester and talking about it and really emphasizing that it's important, and not just trying to say to do it just to kind of be in vogue. I think that's kind of a difficult line to walk, because even now as a board member on the MCVMA, I mean, it's been, the interest in DEI has kind of dwindled in supporting it has dwindled since really it became really big around George Floyd's murder in 2020 and everything, and all the emphasis that kind of came behind that, on all the momentum with that. And then it's kind of slowed down in terms of people really being invested in doing it versus maybe just doing it because we're supposed to. And I think everybody, I know, like I said, I can feel when it's like, we're just doing it because we're supposed to. And then as a BIPOC individual, you're like, why, like what is the point of this then, right? Everybody else around here is like, oh, why am I doing it? I'm here because I really want to get some help, but I can't get any help because now everybody else around me thinks it's just, it's a waste of time. And so that that's another probably additional trauma that we feel, is that when we try to bring these issues up or try to raise awareness about the issues, oftentimes we're met with resistance, because probably because of a variety of reasons, but I think a lot of it has to do with people it becomes uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable, and if you're not forced like we are to deal with it all the time, because we can't just change our faces, then you can kind of look the other way. You can say, oh well, I'm doing the right thing, I'm helping people, I treat people equally, I've never done anything racist before, which may be true, or it just may be that you don't know that what you did made someone feel super uncomfortable and they never told you. So I think, I don't know. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think if you could change the look of our profession, right? If you could try and make it a little bit closer to what our actual communities look like, it would feel more welcoming.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'd like to kind of add a little bit to that, I recognize that Ashleigh and I are kind of like talking a little bit around this, right? And that is the fact that like the work that's being done, people really want an A+ for it, right? Like the DEI work that's being done in our industry, people want the A+ for it, and they're not necessarily like having BIPOC or marginalized identity individuals as decision makers on whether or not it actually goes out, or whether or not it's actually done in a way that's not going to cause harm. And I like recognize that like people want to move quickly. I want things to move quickly too, right? But I think what I've recognized a lot is that people are like, we want to launch this program, we're gonna go ahead and then they're like, okay, well, you're invited to contribute, but there's who is actually saying, yes, this is ready to go out, right? Or if you're utilizing particular voices, I know that like I have had my image and like likeness and interview, like had my voice modified to display a different message than I was told was going to happen, right? And I didn't have a chance to say, there's a problem here. And the thing is that when someone from a marginalized identity says there's a problem here, and it's like, oh, and the response is like, oh, sorry, we'll do better next time, rather than we're going to make a correction and we're going to make correction now. Like, I think very often asking this question about like, who is being harmed, who is being served, like who is getting paid, all of these things are very uncomfortable. But the thing that happens is that like when a lot of BIPOC individuals or other types of marginalized identity make a mistake, we lose our jobs, we get retaliated against. It's like, what direction can we go to not have harm like befall us? And so like when, in the reverse situation, when I am trying to communicate to someone that like there is a problem and they can avoid addressing it, like that's just an example of how big the disconnect is regarding the imbalance of like power, gatekeeping, decision making, and like privilege, right? And I think that's really important, because I would like the freedom to say, I like the fact that I wish I didn't have to say everything that you're doing is really great, but I wish I could just say, here are the problems with the thing you're doing, here is how you do better. And I don't want to have to like put it on a plate being like, let me make you feel really nice and feel really good about what you're doing before I give you critical feedback, because that whole process is really tiring. And I would say in this moment where you have like what I call this, like the unfiltered conversation between a group of BIPOC individuals, like when we have the freedom and the platform to just say like how we feel without fear, it can be a very different conversation than the conversation that's happening out in our profession. And so I didn't like, I was just gonna go for it today. And so I appreciate the platform and the space to do that. But yeah, I think that's really important to say. This is why I work relief.
Totally concur with that. I agree with that completely. Yeah, no, it's also a matter of through those actions, is it really sustainable for us? You know, is it really? That's a big question. Is it just like both you and Dr. Davis were saying? It's like, well, this is being done, that's being done by who, when, how, and who's it damaging? But who's it really helping? How sustainable is it for this community?
Time will tell. ... I don't know. What I can say is that MCVMA has this amazing conference called Rise that is going to be coming up in November. And I had the opportunity to both attend and speak last year. I'm going to be doing the same. And like, I recommend that leadership in organizations attend that conference. Because what you will hear with speakers, especially around DEI issues, is going to be very different than what I am going to, again, be unfiltered. Some of the sanitized, polite, like corporate DEI design, right, which is designed for a particular purpose, for particular groups, and it's very different when you actually sit and have hear people presenting information in a space where they feel safe.
Right, because our conference, the Rise conference, has all BIPOC speakers. So I feel like, and at least last year when I went, it seemed like there were a lot of networking opportunities, and it just was really nice, I think. And a lot of the comments that we got back for people were that it was just so nice to finally feel like there was a whole room of people like you know, they're out there, they're speakers, they just usually aren't at conferences, you know. And so the fact that there was all of these BIPOC speakers and then all these BIPOC veterinarians to network with and talk with and who understood what you were talking about was just really, really powerful. And I'm really excited that we were able to do it again this year. Can't wait to go.
Amazing. So what is your vision for BIPOC veterinary mental health? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, right. So again, I would say like multifaceted. I think that when I was like reflecting a little bit about this, I would say like I want to see like the dissolution or the dissolving of barriers and access to mental health care that is informed and cultural, like with cultural humility, and isn't a source of potential harm for people. And I would like to see an increase in mental health care providers who are informed about veterinary like mental health needs, and that also that the conversations in veterinary mental health have that additional focus on marginalized identity, experience of BIPOC individuals and intersectionality that's not like 100% focused on what we do at work. Because I cannot, like I will not necessarily perform to the best of my ability in veterinary medicine if I just like experienced discrimination like on my way to work. Right, like, or if I experience discrimination in work. It's just not going to happen, or it's going to be really, really, really hard.
Very, very
yeah,
true.
I mean, there was a study, I can't remember, of course I can't remember what, but it was a study. Basically, they did an experiment where they set a group of white people and a group of Black people in 2 different rooms to take this engineering exam. And before the exam, they preface it by telling them, like, you know, because of cultural differences, oftentimes Black people don't do as well on this exam, but it shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? But they put this idea in their head, And then they did it a second time where they told them, you know, there are some cultural we've worked out all of the issues, and we found out that there are that even with cultural differences, there has been no difference between the scores of the white students and Black students. And the people who they told that there had been differences in scores did worse on the test than the people that they told that there was no difference in scores. And so just that the idea that someone could put that idea in your head, you're not as good, you can't do it, there's no one else like you here, you know, you're probably not going to succeed, even if you're just as smart or just as capable or whatever as everybody else around you. That idea really does get in your head and affects your performance. And so that's definitely super important that there's less harm being caused, and that people are recognizing that things outside of the practice of veterinary medicine can affect how you practice veterinary medicine. The only other thing I would mention is, like, I feel like there was a lot of stigma around going, at least when I graduated in 2013, so maybe I'm old, but that there was a lot of stigma around using the mental health therapists or the counseling department, you know, oh, kind of like you weren't strong enough to make it without it, or like you should just be able to do it. Why can't you just do it? Everybody else around you is doing it. It's just as hard for them. And I think now it's become more acceptable, you know, to invest in self-care, and people are talking about it more as like an actual thing that's good to do, and not like, I think it was almost looked at as like you're taking time away from, you just should be studying, right? Just go study, and like you'll do better in school, and like you don't need to go to the mental health counselor. You should just be working harder. If you worked harder, you do better, and then everything will be better. And working harder is not necessarily working smarter. And so I think I'm really glad to see that self-care has become a kind of a hot topic. And I think it needs to be advocated for more. I think there needs to be more ways that the vet school tries to help people not work constantly, right? I mean, it's very easy to be at least my first year, I know I was in school from 8 to 5:30 every day. And then I stayed in an anatomy lab to study for hours after school, you know, I mean, and I didn't, like Erika said, I didn't really eat well, you know, especially when an internship, you're like, I'm in a car, I'm driving, whatever, I'll get something later. You don't eat all day, and you just don't take care of yourself. And so investing that initial effort and that initial into yourself, as opposed to, you know, always giving and giving and giving and giving, so that you have something left to give at the end, I think needs to be emphasized more earlier on in veterinary school, when there's that really there's always a lot of pressure, but there's a lot of pressure, I think, that first year when you're trying to figure everything out. Am I going to stay? Am I going to be able to make it? And realizing it's okay to take a day off and not study, you know, it's okay to go with your friends out, you know, and not feel guilty about it. And I have to study double the next day because I did something good for myself.
Right. I really agree in this kind of shift of some of the like the lineage of like culture that we as in veterinary medicine like perpetuate and try and like dismantle those. I think that they're like one of the biggest shifts that I've seen in the last couple of years is really that coming together of like mentorship and connection, and student connection in this space has been really powerful. So like what I am excited about with the future of mental health in veterinary medicine, specifically for like BIPOC students, is that we know that we're not alone, right? Like MCVMA and NOMV are spaces, and the affinity or other affinity organizations like Pride BMC, Black TVM Network, like so many different organizations that if you look online, like they exist, and those are places where people can connect with other people that can do that, like peer-to-peer and community support, because you know, this how should I say, the imposter phenomena that is created in our industry that goes through across veterinary professionals is having to do kind of with this culture of perfectionism that is unrealistic. And also in this culture of like dysfunctional relationships around like basic needs, around mental wellness, and taking those spaces, as well as like addressing trauma, right? Like it takes time to heal. And sometimes when we're healing from these things, or like dealing with like, you know, I know that I had a fair amount of like internalized racism, as far as like how I was interfacing with my like identity, as far as what I was willing to accept, and especially being like a biracial person that like didn't quite fit in it like anywhere I looked. I recognize now that like having some time to like heal and like connect with my strengths and with community made a huge difference, but that took time, right? And like when you're in a rigorous academic program, sometimes there's not time. So I don't think that I was like on what I call like emotional stasis, emotional hibernation during vet school and my PhD. And then immediately after I graduated, like it took time for me to be able to even start. So I want to see students and people entering our profession, new professionals, new technician graduates, people who are just starting out, to have the support, and then also the program shifts that are changing to create that space where people can start that healing earlier. And that way, like, we can enter a profession as whole people who can support each other and create cultural shifts, and also model that, and not get in the way of that process or that progress. That's what I would love to see for our profession, and I think it's happening. And I'm hoping that it is inevitable. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. It just always takes time, and it always takes more time than I think I wanted to take. I'm like, we've been doing with this for years and years, but I have to realize that, you know, it takes time to get it all the way up to the top to make a policy change that actually affects then back down.
Like Erika said, it's really important to know that we aren't alone. There are spaces, there are places that make us feel like we do belong, that we're working on it. There are people that are in volunteerism, but their goal is to actually work on this profession, work on the community, and actually make people, give them that space to heal and belong.
Yeah.
Carla, I wondered if I might be able to read the questions to you all that have come in. We have 4 questions, and so I'll just do them. Well, actually 2 are the same. So I'll start with that one. So this is from Augusta O'Reilly. She says, how can associations, organizations, or agencies show that we support BIPOC action steps that they can take? And then she also notes that she's the VP of that association, which I believe is the Veterinary Social Workers Association. And and I can say we are actively trying. Thank you for all the work you are doing. So so that's her first question, is what steps can associations, organizations, and agencies take?
So I would say, actually, the MCVMA has worked pretty hard on a list of 7 actionables that we have. It's on our website, mcvma.org. There are 7 actionables that organizations can kind of like go through to kind of help them get to a place that's more inclusive and diverse within their organization. We started that with our #WakeUpVetMed initiative to try and just let everybody, to try and make people aware of the fact that there were so few minorities, and that we needed to try and increase the number of BIPOC individuals. So that's one place that I would definitely go to. And then we even there was an article in JAVMA, I can't remember, it was just this past spring, that where we made the actionables more specific to veterinary schools and universities, to try and make it easier for them to implement. So that's the first place that I would point you to kind of get you started.
Yeah, I think that the actionables produced by the MCVMA are like very, very, very powerful. I think also there are different spaces that you can explore as an organization, and as far as different experts that can be brought in, especially if we're talking about like intersectional issues. Pride BMC has the Gender Identity Bill of Rights, which in it also has some language that's specific to like emotional burdens that marginalized identity groups can face, as well as you know, there are organizations like Transgender Trainer Internationals, TTI, or Transgender Training Institute, that have there are educational systems or DEI systems that are directly putting money back into the pockets of people with lived experience around like discrimination. I think that's always of value. And so there is an entire DEI industry centered around like social justice that has been around for a very, very long time. Now, at the minimum, like considering like having reaching out to speakers with lived experience to invite them into your spaces to talk about it, and to of course make sure that the honorarium like reflects that like emotional burden and expertise that they're taking, because honestly sometimes people have to rest, like after they give that kind of talk, like the rest of the day can be lost for them because they have to restore. So I think that that would be really important. And anytime that you're in this space, you know, asking experts to review like the language, and those people exist, and they're out there and they can provide their services. And I think that's really important, putting the monetary value, because that's, you know, we have to pay to live, right? Yeah.
Would you like me to ask the next one, Carla?
Go for it.
Okay, so the next question is, what can clients, veterinary clinics, and the media do in order to be better allies and help get the word out, improve conditions regarding this critical topic?
One thing that I would think about, especially with like media and media stories and like written word that comes out, there are some organizations that have like media toolkits that like share about what to look out for. So very recently, you know, there are things that come out on this topic sometimes, are areas where marginalized identity is discussed, and like you can tell that the person putting out that information does not have background on how to like, or how to be a trauma informed or focus on harm reduction. And so anyone in a leadership position, before you like put out a policy, have a response, or put out something in this area, to like really reflect before you do it. Like sometimes that extra, you know, time checking it can make the difference. You know, even very recently, like there were concerns around some things that were put forward for AVMA convention, and like an extra 15-20 minutes to review like would have made a difference. And that would be something that I would consider if we talk specifically about media and that kind of thing.
I would think if you're talking about, you also mentioned, I think they also mentioned veterinary clinics and clients in the question. I think trying to create a more inclusive environment, right? So how do you show that you're inclusive? You have literature in multiple languages, right? You have more than one person in the facility, which would be great if you had a doctor and a support staff person that speak another language, whatever language happens to be in your community. I know there's some people who, like, it depends where you're at, what is most prevalent. But obviously the first thing that comes to mind is probably Spanish in most places. But I do know a lot of doctors who get very frustrated with being pulled to the front to translate because they're doctors, right? They're not there to translate what the client is saying. So making sure you have another way, not just a veterinarian to translate, that they don't have to get pulled into every room all day and can't actually see their own patients. Things like setting up community events, right? And welcoming the community in and talking about, doing like a community, I don't know, a potluck or something so they can come in and see the clinic, or they can learn, you give them a little talk about nutrition or something that helps to bring people in and see your clinic and see that you have a diverse staff if you can, or you have at least people who are interested in exploring those things and are receptive to different cultures and different people. And then I think I don't love the word cultural competency, but like trying to understand the cultural differences that may affect choices that people are making for their pets. There may be religious, whatever things that are just different about how they think about animals and life and the human-animal bond, and being able to realize that it's not necessarily a lack of care or neglect, it's just a difference, and understand and trying to be more aware of those differences that you may encounter and be more open to different treatment options, perhaps. Or different ways to do the treatments that may be more amenable to what they're used to.
Also, to add on to that, I would say that examining processes, to have processes already in place to respond to things that will likely happen, right? So I think there are times where what is going to happen if discrimination is encountered? What are the policies, that they are transparent, that the path of accountability is very clear? I think that we're still in a setting where when something happens, people are like, oh, we're addressing it, right? And then it goes behind closed doors. And, I understand that there are examples of like privacy and concern in some situations, especially regarding universities. But like having a process where the people who are harmed have space to both like reset, to heal, to and then also to understand like what are the changes or the accountability or the changes in process that are going to happen are worthwhile. Like preventative management doesn't just work for anesthesia. Like it works for a lot of other things too. So that's why I really recommend organizations that are evaluating things to like really take a good look at how this process of accountability or anonymous reporting, for example, exists for both staff and clients.
I want to say thank you to Cherie Sullivan for saying no questions here, just to say this is great. And thank you, Stacy Grantham, for saying thank you so much. And we have one more question. It says, thank you all for your time and a great panel discussion. I'm an East Asian veterinary student. How have you coped working as one of the few or only BIPOC colleagues, coworkers? I'd love to hear your stories.
So I would say that like when I was going through vet school, it was very different spaces. And actually, I'll be honest, a lot of the BIPOC friends that I have we didn't actually talk to each other about like race, ethnicity, and the struggles that we had faced until recently. So I think that community is really important. So there's the AAVMP, Asian American Veterinary Medical Professionals organization, as an affinity group that I highly recommend. Organizations like Voice or other student organizations that focus on diversity, I think, are really places to connect with people that might not have the same background, but people who can relate. I think that might be really great. And then also understanding that there might also be community that you can connect with outside of professional spaces that can be restorative, and of course, always welcome at MCVMA.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we all have stories we could tell, but I think, so I'm an equine veterinarian, so there's even fewer BIPOC equine veterinarians than there are BIPOC veterinarians in general, less than 1%, I think. I've worked mostly places where I'm the only person of color. And I think one thing that I wish I had not been as scared to do would be and I think you have the more opportunity now because the job market is more geared towards hiring, because there's such a need for veterinarians, is just not tolerating bad behavior, right? I think for a long time, and it's in most situations in my pre-veterinary school classes, in my vet school classes, in my internship, in my jobs, I'm really one of few. And so I just was used to it. I'm just one of you. It's just me. I'm just here. Like, it's no different than any other place I've ever been. Just put your head down. You got to get through. You got to make your grades. You got to be able to apply for an internship. There's no time to worry about other stuff. And I honestly, in veterinary school, didn't spend a lot of emotional capital on I didn't focus on trying to deal with any of that. I just kind of got to keep going, just keep going. And then in my job, when I had some jobs, I think I just tried to say, oh, it's just because I'm new, or it's because I practiced a different way than them. I learned a different kind of, different way to wrap the foot than they did, and they didn't think it was appropriate or whatever, right? I try and blame it on something else. And I'm sure there were some times when, I was told, clients don't want you to come out anymore. You're not passionate about your care for animals. I'm like, what? How did this happen? And so I think having a boss or a clinic that's supportive of you being able to say, hey, this client said this thing really bad to me, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. I really don't want to have to go back there again. Or I drove to this farm, they sent me to a farm on a farm call, and they had Confederate flags all over. And I'm like, you sent me? Maybe you should send someone else. Maybe you should, I don't really, and of course, I'm here still, right? So it turned out okay, but I'm like, I'm in the country somewhere in Florida, and I'm like, okay. I just, I felt uncomfortable. Did I say anything? No. I didn't feel, and maybe I could have, but being more outwardly supportive of yourself. Hey, this makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't like this, and I don't want to have to deal with it, and I shouldn't have to. What are we doing about it? Can you send someone else there next time? I don't want, whatever it is, I think I wish I had been a little bit more, had advocated more for myself. And so I would encourage you to do that. And not be, retaliation especially is sometimes real, but I think you don't want to be in a situation where you're constantly stressed and traumatized trying to just get through.
Yeah, I think I would also say, and this is something in advocacy work in general, to give yourself permission to not feel just by existing and taking up space. That's the revolutionary act in itself, right? So I've talked to a lot of individuals throughout the profession who are like, I am not making progress changing this organization. It's not your burden, right? That in that each time that we try and create change, if the response doesn't happen, to not internalize that, and to also give yourself a chance to rest and restore is really important. There are a couple of really great resources. There's a book that recently came out called Decolonizing Wellness that is about self-care from the perspective of BIPOC identity, which is really important. And so I think that I think for me, I learned or recognized being connected to more BIPOC community, that like a lot of what I had just labeled as generalized misogyny was actually racial misogyny. And that's really important. It's important to give yourself space to recognize that, like, when we're dealing with spaces where like our lives and our safety are at risk, that is a big emotional burden, right? And I think that very often when you're the only person in the room, like you're used to just putting your head down and like just pushing on through, right? And I think at times creating space where you can see like, where did I store that? Where in my mind and in my body did I store that? And like finding places where you can at a pace that works for you, like heal and have supportive community that does that. And so I think that for me has again and again been the thing that has helped me get through, like being one of the few, is connecting with supportive community. You know, allies have also played a really big role in that for me. So for those who are here on your journey of allyship, I thank you. You know, like people within NOMV have been incredibly supportive, and know that, like, you know, a good litmus test is if you notice something and you challenge someone's thinking on something and they're like, thank you so much, and, you know, work with you, that those are people that you can like continue to work with openly, right? And authentically.
Thank you. Those are all the questions we had. I definitely would like to thank Dr. Erika, Dr. Ashleigh, and everyone who joined and registered for this webinar. Thank you to NOMV and Covetrus for this amazing opportunity to have this platform to discuss how important this is in this community and actually just overall in our society.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. And feel free to reach out if anybody has any further questions or whatever. I'm always available via, you know, email or whatever. Reach out to NOMV, they can contact me, and I'll answer any other questions.